that's what the perfectionism conversation kills. But
Yeah.
if you've grown up in the Black community, it's like,
Yeah,
do it properly or not at all. I'm Ella.
And I'm Kieran. Welcome to Impolite Company, the podcast in which we bring our Black queer perspectives to some of the most interesting and pertinent DEI issues of the moment.
Join us as we laugh, cry and go deep on what topics are exciting us, as well as what's keeping us up at night. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm exhausted, Kieran, but I'm fine. How are you doing?
Yeah. I feel like, I can't complain at the moment. I'm having a little bit of a break. So I can't say I'm exhausted for the same reasons, but I feel exhausted, a little bit exhausted. Not that I'm trying to just jump onto the exhausted bandwagon.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm fairly good otherwise. This is our last episode of season 2.
Yes.
2 seasons, which is amazing. Apologies for the gap, everybody that's been listening religiously. This is something that we are definitely working on, and we've had conversations with the people that help us with the production of the podcast to make sure we're a little bit more reliable with our release schedule, which hopefully in season 3 we get much better at. We should probably put that as one of our things, one of our ins.
Yes, Ella and Kieran to get better at recording.
Yeah. So last year, for our final episode, I think it was actually a bonus episode, we looked back and we used the retrospective. It was the retro episode where we used kind of the product retrospective to talk about what we want to start, stop and continue. But the 2025 season's here already, which seems crazy because it feels like we only did that not that long ago. But that was actually, I think, something like 12 episodes ago, which seems crazy. And we always want to start I think most people want to start the year and use that kind of shift into a new year as a time to kind of start intentionally planning what they want to kind of go for in the year ahead. So we're going to forget the rear view mirror, and we're not going to talk about what we've done in the past, really. And we're going to focus on kind of the ins and outs for 2025. So we're approaching it slightly differently, just to switch up a little bit. So that's the premise of today of this. I guess it's not a bonus episode, it's just the finale. So yeah. Ella, do you want to start or should I?
You start, I think. We're already a month into 2025. But we thought, nevertheless, better late than never. Let's set our intentions and avoid the January rush.
Yeah. Yeah, we're tracking a month behind to slow down to speed up.
Exactly. We're not about the 1st of January resolutions. We're coming in strong mid-Feb.
Go on there, but jokes aside, it's a really good point of like doing something is better than not doing it at all a lot of the time. Sometimes I've been in situations where I'm like, oh God, I should have done that ages ago. And it might be something that no one's asked for, but I've been asked to do it. And I'm like, actually, let me do it before they ask for it. And it's always better than not doing it at all. Yeah,
absolutely. There's a sort of, interestingly, on one of my outs, and I think I might have said something similar last year. So this is probably always going to be a work in progress, right? Is my own perfectionism, essentially. Yeah. And I think this is part of, it was my mum's birthday this past weekend and we went up to Leeds and obviously you talk about, parents do that thing where they talk about, this is what they've always been like. I always knew from the womb, I knew, and one of the things that she was talking about was Ella's always been a perfectionist and, has always been, if I'm going to commit to something, I'm going to do it and I'm going to fit it in and I'm going to do it by the deadline. She was going on about this. But she was right. And so that struggle of feeling like I'd rather not do something at all than feel behind or feel like I'm not doing it to perfectly or as amazingly as I would want to do it. And actually, I think that's really a curse. And I think there's lots of things over the course of my life that I've given up on because I wasn't, in my mind, doing them well enough.
And that's subjective, right? Like a lot of the time, your okay might be incredible to someone else.
Absolutely. Often because I'm a perfectionist, and other perfectionists will relate, my standards are quite high. So, there's that side of it. And then there's also the side of it, which is it takes the joy out of the doing. So, you and I had a conversation before Christmas where we talked about this podcast and the recording schedule and how we're not keeping up with it because we're both super busy. And if we're not doing it, if we're not nailing it, should we continue doing it? And I reflected on, you gave me a bit of a pep talk on that, but I reflected on it, and actually I wasn't that vantage point doesn't take into account the joy of the doing.
Yeah.
So is this something worth doing, whether or not we manage to do it perfectly?
Yeah.
Is this something that we both enjoy doing? Is it something worth doing? Is it a conversation worth having?
Yeah.
And I think that's what the perfectionism conversation kills. But if you've grown up in the Black community, it's like, do it properly or not at all. And that's kind of in the DNA.
Yeah. So I think kind of rewiring your brain, or just at least being self-aware of deciding what needs to be your level of high quality for that specific task, and what can probably be done to a lower quality is hard. I get it.
Yeah. So that's just always, I think, a work in progress for me. And I'm sort of always battling with what I should do, what I should drop, I sort of have a running to-do list in my head constantly of that needs doing and that needs doing and this needs doing. And when was the last time we defleed the cat? And I'd really like to redecorate the hallway. And it's just like...
Yeah.
And on top of that, you're trying to actually do defleeing the cat is not something I'm holding myself to a high standard on. But you're then constantly, you've got the running things that you need to do. And if you're not getting them all done, you don't feel like you're doing well. And then it's also the standard of each thing. And I know it's not sustainable or wise or healthy, but it's a real internal battle. And there's a real fear of lowering standards, or if I just chill out, or I just relax about it, or I just take it easy, or I just don't bother, that somehow that will lead to anarchy, chaos. What happens if... And actually, my partner and I sometimes have disagreements about certain things. Like, one of the things is to do with like level of commitment and like plans.
Yeah.
So she's quite willing to drop out of a thing. Be like, I don't feel like it today. Like, not as lightweight as that, but I just don't want to do this today. I don't feel great, or I'm not. And I'm very like, we committed to the thing. We're going to the thing. Even if I don't feel like it. And so I have this real like, is she right, or is her way better? She'll be very self-care about it. I'll be like, no, don't listen to your body. Don't listen to yourself.
Yeah.
Have a shower, get your clothes on, and go to this thing you committed to going to.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that, I think that's a facet of the sort of perfectionism for me. But anyway, we've started with one of my outs. That's an ongoing thing that I'd like to get rid of.
Let's start with the outs then. So one of mine is relying too heavily on one source of income. So I think, I think when you are working in house, it creates a level of pressure that I don't want to have. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it allows me to work my best when you have a finite source of income and you're really heavily wedded to that source of income. So one of the things I want to do is kind of broaden that by starting a few things, which I'll talk about in my ins, where I'm able to kind of diversify my income and do things that not only diversify my income, but feed my needs and wants and my heart in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think it's really about investing in things that feed, my brain and my soul, and make sure I don't neglect that. I can still work hard in my main source of income, and probably would work better if I'm making sure that I look after myself more holistically and I'm achieving some of the things that I want to achieve in my life more holistically. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot. Now I've had some time to, and it's really, I've realized how, and speaking to my therapist, speaking to my coach, realized how much I hadn't been thinking about those things. I'm really up until this point. So yeah, that's my out for this year, is having one thing that financially supports me.
Yeah, because I guess it's not just the financial, it's what having that does psychologically. You know, I have experienced being, I didn't think about it in quite the terms you've put it there, but the similar thing of the company where we met, that I was at for 10 years.
Yeah.
I was so psychologically attached to that company in an definitely unhealthy way. I wasn't doing stuff to build my personal brand outside of the context of that company. I wasn't networking. I wasn't really building community. I was like, I had created this identity that I was one of the sort of founding team almost. And I ultimately wasn't. Like, I was in the sense of when I joined, but I wasn't in the sense of payout. So actually just having all of my eggs in that basket in such an intense way was unhealthy and didn't necessarily, there are lots of things that I'm really grateful for in terms of what that company did for my career, like loads of things. It was absolutely instrumental in the, you know, through line between what I built there and where I am today is undeniable. But I also kind of, one of the learnings I think was absolutely to kind of not get completely psychologically wedded to and engrossed in one thing, because it's not smart, but also it's not particularly healthy. And exactly to your point, I'm not sure it makes you a better employee of that place. I actually think you're a better employee if you are taking time out and thinking about other things and, you know, reading and going for walks and nurturing your social life and also maybe doing some consulting on the side, because also you're seeing how other people are doing things and you're speaking to other people and you're not, you know, it kind of, the brain development that does, because you can't get into the same groupthink that you can get into in one place, is almost certainly makes you better employee at that place.
And I think it's different for everybody. There'll be probably people that would say the complete opposite. They find being, what maybe they would see as kind of complete loyalty to one thing and just focusing on that one thing might work for them. But for me, it's something that I've realized that, I actually think that I love learning and I need quite a lot of stimulation in that sense, in terms of doing things. And that plays into having multiple sources of income. And for me, like you said, I think that will open up a different way of approaching work, which I think will be beneficial for not only the place where I'm working, but also for me.
Yeah. And just on that topic of loyalty as well, I think my thinking on that has evolved over time. I don't think it's actually healthy to be, hope no one I work with is listening. No, I'm not going to say anything. I think increasingly over time, it's healthy to be loyal to people, but I don't think I want to be loyal to institutions, because institutions, sorry, and I don't mean broader societal institutions. Like, I think there are institutions I believe in, including the one I work in, but I think that sort of sense of loyalty, at least for my brain, when I got into that in a previous life and felt really loyal to the organization, it actually was a bit of a trap, I think, because the organization is not loyal to you back. Like, the organization doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have empathy. It's an entity. The humans within it, yes, of course. You're loyal to the people you work with, your team, your community, your manager. Like, you want to do a good job by those people and you want to add value. All of those things make total sense to me. But I think, at least for me, the more I get into a sense of loyalty to an organization, in a feelings-based way, the more unhelpful that is.
Yeah.
For
and
me,
I think it's around, for me, I think everything you said is completely true, and kind of the way that I think about it as well. And have thought and have developed in that thinking of it. But also for me, it's about being able to have clear context and be able to process things in a more balanced way. I think if you're blindly loyal, you can't identify how an organization is changing. You can't identify how you need to change, to how your role is changing, how you show up in that organization and how that might change over time. An organization is an entity, right? It's not static, and it's not one person. So I think if you are blindly loyal, you're missing out on all of those nuances. And sometimes, and I think I've seen it, and maybe I've been that person, but I've seen when people are like so wedded to how something was when it was like 5 people compared to when it's 500, and they desperately want to work in the same way. It's like, it's never going to be that again. And you're still trying to work in the same way, and that is causing lots of friction, when actually you could have an easier life and we can have better performance. And
that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's like the other trap that loyalty to an organization creates is loyalty to your idea of what the organization is or was.
Yeah.
And so if you have a very set idea about that and you're loyal to that, then actually that is a hindrance to its progress anyway, because you're like, well, I was here 5 years ago, and this is who we are, and this is what we are, and that's what I'm still driving towards.
What's your second out?
It is, well, we could talk about this for hours, so I'm going to caution us not to. I've said in my notes regression in general.
That's a big statement. Of course, we could talk about that for hours.
Just regression. And actually, one of my other outs fits into this, but I'll leave it as a separate out because it's a very specific, different thing, or it's a different example. The thing that sort of sparked me to say this is, obviously, we're seeing everywhere we look companies rolling back. Rolling back is the headline
Tell
news.
Tell me about it.
Rolling back commitments, rolling back DEI, deciding not to do it anymore. And what obviously that bothers me deeply, as I'm sure it does you, for a number of reasons, and we could do a whole episode about what's happening.
Which we definitely should. I've actually been asked if we are doing that.
If we're going to, okay, we've had a request.
Yeah.
So I won't get into like all of the ins and outs of that, because I think actually it does require its own conversation. But I think a thing I wanted to highlight is my disappointment, really, that, perhaps not surprise, but disappointment that I feel like the world is I think we're not good as a kind of broad global society, or let's take the global north, right, at being able to kind of see, to look long term, to hold complex ideas in our heads, to be able to see nuance, to be able to see the sort of non-linear nature of what progress looks like. And I think that when winds change, we just sort of go with them. And that's a thing that I've found disappointing. The wind changed right when it was COVID and George Floyd was murdered. And sort of everyone went with a sort of wind, not because they really understood, maybe they read White Fragility at the time, but not because they were trying to deeply understand, but that because that was the way the wind was blowing.
Yeah.
And now the wind's blowing another way. So we've all sort of come up with these excuses and these explanations for why actually I think we're over that now. I think we've realized it's bad, or I think we've realized that it's not actually that helpful, or it's actually unfair, or it's harming meritocracy, and it's all, every single news article I read makes me rage because it's so transparently dishonest.
Yeah.
It's so transparently, you couldn't stay the course with this thing because it was too hard, and because you didn't necessarily fully believe in it in the first place, because you did it because you thought you had to. And now you don't have to anymore. So you're not going to. Or now there's actually active pressure for you to drop it. So you're going to drop it. And it's that sort of inability to have any kind of moral integrity that is deeply disappointing. Not necessarily surprising, but deeply disappointing. And I think that actually, on a good day, what I would say is, I think that's not going to last very long. As in, I think that we've gotten to a point where we're sick of people doing this, and that people who do care are, what did I say to a friend the other day? I said, I think we're winning the war, but this is the battle we're currently losing within it. You know, the long arc of this, actually, we're winning. But then the short-sighted people are looking on the battlefield and going, God, there's a lot of casualties here. Maybe we should just retreat.
Yeah.
And I would like to see more people saying, no, this is a war we're winning. And actually, even if we're not, the alternative is so dark that we might as well fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does retreat look like? What does appeasement look like in this context?
Yeah.
And fuck that.
Yeah. But I think it's also, I think we've been so short-sighted in general for everything for so long now. Like, I can't, I used to think, an 18-month strategy was short-sighted, or 2-year strategy was short-sighted. I mean, I would love to have something that lasted over 6 months, where people were committing to things that were, over 6 months, that were anywhere near that. And I think we've slowly become adjusted to reacting and doing things in a short-term capacity. And I think that's part of that reason, right? Like, because everything's like that. Everything at work's like that. Everyone's only ever thinking 6 months ahead. Like, all the stuff that's going on in the US, which we'll do another episode for, like, it's clearly going to crash and burn, and lots of people are going to be impacted by it. But people are just thinking about the next 6 months.
And 100%. And I also think that, and obviously this is a real battleground for me in my work at the moment and in my workplace in a way, although I'm lucky that I'm sort of plowing on and I'm not being told not to. But it's also the other thing that bothers me about the regression thing, aside, you're totally right. The short attention span is a huge part of this. The sort of misinformation on social media is such a big part of this. Trump, don't get me started. And that's been those building blocks he's been putting in place for years now. Like, what we have to do at moments like this is look to history. And I don't understand as a human race why we are so poor at that. Why we seemingly are so bad at calling things what they are and looking at the signs, right? We saw this, and we haven't done an episode on this, but we saw this with Gaza. Lots of people sounding the alarm on what that was very early on. And a lot of people going, how dare you? How dare you compare? It's like the whole point of history is for us to be able to learn from and compare and see, okay, if something doesn't start with concentration camps, because that kind of idea doesn't really fly, right? What does it start with? What are the things that we start to see being normalized when there's a hostile takeover, when there's a coup, when we're trying to move a liberal democracy to a dictatorship? What are the different pieces? And obviously, I started this piece by talking about DEI, but the broader context beyond corporate DEI is much more about actual people's civil rights, and I don't think those two things should be conflated. And what's happening here, with the DEI question is certain civil rights are being called DEI so that people are okay with them being torn down. And we need to be really clear about what DEI is and isn't. And it's not about people's human rights.
A lot of those things are laws as well.
Those foundational legal, tenets. Anyway, so I think that's a frustrating piece for me as well, of of you're not allowed to say, the Nazis did this, because it's like, how dare you ever compare anyone to Nazis? They were the most evil people in the world, never, and it's like, that's not an unprecedented thing. Lots of examples of that have happened all over the world in lots of different contexts. And what we have to be better at doing is seeing when those whiffs of that are happening again. And we are really bad at it. And you can see this regression happening, obviously, in the US, but it has knock-on effects for everywhere. And for me, not enough people are calling it what it is, or not enough people in power. Not enough people who have a platform, not enough people in the media, not enough people in government. I understand, everybody's scared because America. And so it's like we're taking this regression at face value as something that is just happening rather than something that we can stop.
Yeah. And it's really, I find that really disheartening, right? When, like you said, there's so much history to draw from. And yes, times do change, but not that quickly. And a lot of these things are repeated.
Germany in the 1920s was very, very open. Like, this is another thing that people, again, this is what history tells us. It's not like it can happen in societies that are very open, very queer friendly, very and all of the people saying this, that won't happen. It's like, it can and it will. These things are flimsy. They're not a given. They're not set in stone. And even if you look to the recent history, right, as Roe versus Wade taught us nothing, that is a specific example of this is set, this is a precedent, this will not be pulled back, and it was pulled back straight away. That's a very, very recent example we can draw from. So we're not even good at looking at the last couple of years.
Yeah. And that's what's scary, right? Is when you take your foot off the gas, what you allow in can be really toxic and can have such a huge impact in regression in general. And we, like you said, I think it's, I agree. I think we're going in the right direction, and this is a battle that we're currently losing. I also think people are exhausted. I think fairly people are exhausted and it's not because, and that's not an excuse, but I think a lot of people in our lifetime haven't had to deal with so many things like this from a social perspective. And
tired of living through historical moments every day.
Yeah. And I think
no news day.
Yeah. Like I know that my mum mentioned something the other day. She was like, I'm just really tired. I'm tired of everything.
Yeah, everybody
and
is
she's
exhausted.
Retired. And she's just like, I'm just really tired. And he just wants to enjoy the freedom that they have now that they're not working. And I think there's a lot of people at different stages in their life that are didn't realize they needed a break until it just, I think by this point they thought they'd have I think me included, thought I'd have an opportunity to just
chill,
slow down,
not be an activist.
Yeah. And I think it takes digging from a deep place to continue. Like even us talking about, from the feedback that we get from the people that listen to the podcast, it's having, even if it's a small impact, I think it's important. And that drives me. And I enjoy having these conversations. Going back to what you were saying, the conversation we had before Christmas is, I think us not being consistent with our scheduling is just a small thing that we will iron out at some point. But the content is important. And it's a similar conversation that we had with the company that produces the podcast. The content has never been an issue. And I think people feel it's important. And as long as that's the feedback that we're getting, I think it's important to keep doing those things. It's those small things. I hope people they don't take their foot so far off the pedal, they're not doing anything. That's what scares me. So
because it's actually easy to give in to this despair, but actually it's the small things that make up the larger things. And actually, I'll talk a little bit about that on one of my ins. But what's your next one?
My next out is being too risk averse. I think sometimes I'm really good at taking calculated risks. And I think that has been something that I've worked on, especially within my career, But I think the thing that I want to change is I don't want being too risk averse to stop me moving quickly on something that fits and excites me in terms of opportunities. So I think for me, it's like grabbing those opportunities that present themselves, not thinking too much about them and trusting my gut. Because I think 9 times out of 10, my initial gut feeling is the same after I've done all the processing. And I think I need to make sure that I trust my gut more. And I do trust my gut a lot of the time, but I think there's things where I don't need to be so risk averse.
Well, do you know also what myself and my manager talked about last week at some point was, she was talking about her instinct, and we were talking actually about the limitations of data and of data being important, but also of instinct being important. And one of the things we spoke about was that actually instinct is data. Your instinct is you might not be cognizant of it, but it's you're kind of processing all of your experience and all of the things that you've seen before, and all of the like red flags and all of the green flags and all of that stuff processing quickly is essentially your instinct.
Yeah, it is quantitative.
It's data. And I think that kind of framing it in that way, I mean, obviously you've got to be mindful. I will sometimes meet someone, just as an example, I'll sometimes meet someone who I immediately like, I don't like you. And this is where you've got to be careful with your instinct. Because it could just be like bias or something, But I've come to realize in a sort of self-knowledge way that normally when I get such a strong reaction like that, it's telling me something that I haven't figured out yet. And honestly, never wrong. Never wrong. I'm like, I knew I didn't like that guy. But it's like my brain takes a while to catch up to my visceral bodily reaction.
And you want to give everyone a chance, probably. I know
of
that's
course.
what I'm like. Sometimes I'm like, oh, and I'll just be like, maybe the way they spoke to somebody else, but again, the same. My initial gut instinct is very rarely that far off.
And it applies to work stuff as well. Like instinctively, I feel like we should go in this direction. I can't really tell you why, but I just know it's right. And you've got to sort of have a better answer than that in some senses. But I think it is the cumulative experience that you've got that tells you that sometimes, and that is data.
Yeah, and it's not that it's shut off to changing given new information. Like there might be someone that has, something that they bring something else to the table that gives you a better insight into.
And it doesn't mean you shouldn't stress test it either, right? Like it doesn't mean you should just plow into that decision. But I think often that instinctive kind of, it's that direction, I think. I don't tend to, when I do all of the sort of why that and interrogation of it tends to hold up.
Yeah, and I think it also, so for me, being more risk averse also feeds into, me wanting to start doing more intentional coaching and building out a business around that is a risk. I mean, it's something that I've never fully committed to, but it's something I love doing and I do every day in my job and with my teams and with the people around me. And if I continue to not commit to it because there's a risk of it not panning out, I'll never know. And that's not really a way to live.
My final out is Ozempic.
I didn't know it was in.
It's in. Well, it's in for the world. It's out for me.
Yeah, I feel the same.
And actually, I should clarify, because there's a lot of information out there and research out there about Ozempic being a really good thing. And I'm not trying to poo-poo that or spread misinformation. And I don't know long term what the answer on that is. I mean, there's an instinctive part of me that thinks there's no such thing as a non-side effect miracle, but that's sort of not the angle that I'm coming from anyway, because I think people have a right to take whatever they want to take and to do whatever they want with their body, and that's up to them. And also, there's drugs like this for people who really need them are revolutionary, and we should celebrate them. What I don't like, and what I don't think is being talked about, is the cultural impact that it's having.
That's the reason why I feel uncomfortable with it as well.
And, take the health stuff to the side, whether it's good, bad, what's that, For me, the thing that I think is deeply disturbing about this sort of ubiquitousness of it, and like, it feels at least as though in certain privileged circles, everyone is taking it.
Yeah.
Like it's not a kind of fringe thing. It's
no, not anymore.
Most people who I see who have lost quite a lot of weight, that is the reason. Yeah. Like, it's not kind of, it's the exception that they've not taken it than the rule, it seems like. And what we're seeing culturally is a return to like 90s, noughties, heroin chic, skinny is back, baby. And I think that, like, for the culture, that's really unhealthy, because whatever choices each individual wants to make about their own weight loss or whatever, I think that we had it feeds a bit into the regression thing I was talking about. It feels like we had a moment of like body positivity and of recognizing that different bodies were valid, and some people were built differently, and there was beauty in all body types. And there is a lot of stuff about the like racial component of things like BMI and the sort of, so there is a part of that sensitivity for me as well around how skinny is often white, and the sort of cultural and the historical component of that. And so anyway, skinny's back. Ozempic is fueling skinny being back. You saw with like Couture Fashion Week, I don't know if that's a thing that you follow or not, but no plus size models really. It's really kind of regressed back to a certain type and a certain valorization of a certain body type. And I think that now there's this social pressure, a little bit like how it's anyone's prerogative to do Botox.
Yeah.
But the sort of cumulative effect of everyone doing Botox is that we don't allow women to age. I think there's a similar thing happening with weight.
Takes on a new form, I think.
60-year-old women shouldn't... If 60-year-old women look 60, they look old in our estimation of what that... And that's nuts. And so I think that's what's happening with this.
Yeah, but I also think that people that... there's a certain look that people go for that is not timeless. It actually makes young people look older. So you might have bigger lips, you might have, you might technically have a different jawline, higher cheekbones, but actually the act of doing that sometimes ages people, I think. And it's almost
it ages young women. Yeah. I think there's a if you're in your 20s and you're doing that, you look older. But I also think we're allergic to seeing women with lines, women in their 50s and 60s with lines. And I'm not immune to this. Like, sometimes I see people and I think, gosh, she's looking old. And actually then I have to check myself and be like, she looks her age. She looks her age with no surgical enhancement, and that's normal.
For me, the most recently where I had to check myself was Pamela Anderson, who looks incredible for her age.
Yes. Agree.
But when I first saw her, I was like, because my image in my head of what she looked like before, I guess what we are exposed to all the time, I was a bit like, oh, she looks different. But actually then when you think how old she is, you're like, regardless even of her age, she looks incredible. It's just that she's aged and she looks different.
And that's also why what she's doing is quite revolutionary, because it's like a rewiring. She's telling us as a culture to rewire our perceptions and our expectations. And I think that's important. So it's that she's holding the line in a way. And I think when it comes to Ozempic, very few people are holding the line. Like, Everyone's taking it. Everyone's losing insane amounts of weight. Sorry, not everyone, but like insane amounts of weight really quickly. And there's also a kind of like, why wouldn't you? Because you can now. It's easy. And I think, well, but what that does as well is it makes skinny the goal. It doesn't make strength or health or anything the goal. It makes skinny the goal. And that there's something really that I find quite upsetting about that.
Yeah, I think it exposes what people, and I'm not sure how many people are actually losing weight to be fit or trying to be fit. That's always been something that I've been really, for me, like I'm carrying a lot more pounds than I'd like to, but for me, it's always about fitness. I think a lot of people, I don't have a lot of understanding of fitness. Like I did a lot of sport when I was younger. I was an athlete, I was a swimmer. I was naturally exposed to what fit looks like. And that's always something that I lead with, is like being fit. I want to be able to run for the bus and not be out of breath, or I want to be able to recover quickly. So it kind of drilled into me. I think what this does is take advantage of people's lack of understanding of that, and actually how some people see a distortion when they're looking at other celebrities that are actually fit. So people like Beyonce, a lot of the time, her body represents someone that's very fit a lot of the time, like extremely fit, but it gets distorted, I think, in people's brains, and them looking like that is just being skinny.
Yeah, like Serena Williams is another example of that.
Yes, exactly. But the other thing I just wanted to quickly say on that is I was in America. I could not believe the amount of adverts for the different brands of weight loss injections, including a Weight Watchers Ozempic.
Oh, Weight Watchers, blast from the past.
Yeah. And I guess it's because, there was a big scandal, right, of all of their ambassadors. It turned out like most of them were taking the weight loss injections.
Yeah, they're all just got diarrhea.
Yeah, exactly. So now they're just like, right, let's go with it. And you can now do Weight Watchers along a weight loss. You can do Weight Watchers along your Weight Watchers branded in weight loss injections.
Oh, God.
And the amount of adverts on TV is scary for all these different brands.
Yeah, that's rough. Do you want to do any more outs, or do you want to go to your ins?
Let's go to ins. Because
Hit me with your first in, Kieran.
My first in is more time with family and friends. I think I have done a really good job this year of trying to spend more time with my family. But I want to do more of that. I want to do more time with my family and friends. And my living situation's changed. I moved into my house. I'm living with one of my really good friends. And we do a lot of stuff with our group of friends now. It's like a very kind of much more social house. I'm back in kind of the area where my family live. I'm seeing my family more. My mum popped round today. I saw both my sisters last week. I'm just seeing people more. So I think for me, that's a really big priority. And I think the last couple of years leading up to now making those changes, there's been times where I've just like forgotten birthdays and stuff like that, where they're in my calendar, but I've it's not been my focus. And I think that's a dangerous place to get to. So for me, in a nutshell, is like making sure that I'm proactively making more time for family and friends and the people that mean the most to me.
Yeah. That resonates. I've got nurturing my home life and environment. And part of that is exactly what you're talking about. I think the last year for me, I started a new role. It's a very engrossing, very intense and time consuming thing. And especially obviously just in general, when you start a new role, and also it's a new kind of function within the company. So you feel like you really have to prove yourself and prove that the function is valuable and valid. And in the course of that, I have just had no headspace. It's really like no headspace for, I've nurtured my friendships and my family relationships, and that they've not suffered as such, but I'm not giving all of my attention when I should be, and I'm not giving all of my focus, and I am distracted, and I am blurring the boundaries for sure. And that's something, I kind of pride myself in being a person who gives thoughtful presents, and I almost like haven't got headspace for that. I'm sort of like maintaining a decent level, back to the perfectionism, but not necessarily the level that I'd like to. And the environment piece is a bit like, I think we all go through waves with our flats or our houses where we get like sick of them. And I'm in a sick of it stage. And I feel like there are just those snagging bits and pieces that I have neglected and, haven't, this needs a bit of redecorating, or we need to replace this thing. I'm sort of in an itchy, like, need to get those things done now and need to feel a bit of a refresh.
Yeah.
So I think also that's the thing I'd like to do this year, is to just invest a little bit, not even a load of money, but invest a little bit of time in doing a couple of those things that make you feel better about your space.
I think that's really important to acknowledge, right? The impact it's having on you from kind of a psychological perspective of like, it's not just vanity. It's making
100%.
you feel better about the space that you're in.
100%. And I think we all are, but I'm very impacted by spaces and the environment. And I'm one of those people who, like, I can't relax if we go out for dinner and I don't like the restaurant vibe. If I don't like the lighting, if I don't like if I don't like the environment, I'm not, apart from grabbing a quick lunch, that's not. So I'm really impacted by that stuff. And so I think I need to do a bit of that this year. What's your next one?
So my next one is kind of formally setting up my coaching, which I actually mentioned earlier. So formally setting up my coaching and consulting business. So coaching individuals and teams, and all of my pages will actually probably be live by the time this is released, but is really, like I said earlier, being less risk averse and doing that, because I know it's something that will not only feed me as an individual, feed my soul. I think there are things in my experience that I'd like to pass on, and there's no reason why, kind of in this context as a coach, that can't be paid for. So I think just being comfortable with that and getting that all set up. And, there is that kind of imposter syndrome that we talked about earlier of like, I'm quite happy to coach when it's in my job, but then when you're being paid for it to coach, it's like a different thing that you have to, I think, the same way when we started this podcast, right? That same kind of feeling.
Yeah.
So that's my second one, is like formally getting that all set up, which it should all be actually live by the end of the week, which I'm really, really happy about. I kind of did all the words for those pages.
Nice.
In the last couple of weeks. So feel ready to kind of open that out to the world, the world of LinkedIn. And even if I get a couple of, clients, for me, that would be a win. So that's my second one.
Nice. So I've realized lots of mine are kind of linked, so I'm going to sort of merge them a bit. But one of mine is community.
Yeah.
And I think that with the stuff that we talked about, societal sort of regression and people, companies, corporations showing us who they are and not staying the course and all that kind of stuff, I think that there's a couple of things that are really necessary if we want to win the bigger war. And I think community is central to that. The more I think about it, the more I read, the more I look at what's worked in the past, it keeps coming back to this question of community. And I think, well, there's probably lots of aspects to it, but the two key aspects for me are the sort of self-care component of building community, the how do you combat despair? Well, actually, I think it's in the small actions, it's in the small conversations, it's in continuing to do things like this, it's in going to dinner with your friends, and it's in meeting up with people who get it, and in whatever form that takes, and whether it's quite formalized or it's a walk in the park, but like nurturing the people around you and the relationships around you, I think is central, because I think it grounds you back in, not everything is awful. There are good people in the world, love thy neighbor and all of that stuff. And I think that's essential to re-energizing us.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And then second, so go on.
No, I was just going to comment on that.
Say.
One of the things that I think I talk about a lot of the time and it's talked about a lot of the time in product and UX is zooming in and zooming out. There are times where you need to have those conversations on a kind of outwardly broader platform for more people to hear, and you need to, when you're zoomed out, you need to be able to that you have more impact by speaking to as many people as possible. But I also think there's times like now where I've put here as well, like community is really important. There's times when you need to zoom in.
Yeah.
And I think there are my community, and I mean that from not just my family, but where I live. There are opportunities to have lots of impact now close to home. And there are times where you need to do that. And that's how you get through, I think, these smaller battles.
Yeah.
There's lots more groundwork to do. And I think that for me is something that's really important, getting into some kind of regular participation in the community is really important. And I think, just to comment on that, it's like that zoom out and zoom in thing. I think it's something
100%.
Relate.
And the second part, which is part of it anyway, is not just from a sort of filling up your cup perspective, but from a what is actually required for the fight perspective. I think it's also community, because I think we have to keep building. We have to build sort of bonds across experiences and we have to do some coalition building, really.
Yeah.
And that's done on a kind of one-to-one basis in many ways, I think. Actually, the more we do that kind of outreach and the more we resist isolation, I think isolation and despair are kind of interwoven and connected. And I think hope and action and community are also connected. And so I think that's kind of the antidote. How do you build hope? Because hope is a galvanizing, action-based thing. And I think you build hope by building community. And so that's how I'm sort of trying to think about the current. Because if I think about Donald Trump in Washington, like, I can't think about the things that I have no control over. Elements are huge. Yeah, you scream me into the void constantly. Yeah. I couldn't vote. I can't do anything about that. I can't. But what I can do is what's in front of me. And I actually think that collectively, if that's what we're all doing, that is really
that's setting strong foundation.
Impactful. Yeah.
And it's
so that's what I'm going to try and do.
Rigid foundations for what's to come.
Yeah. And actually, just one final thing on this is I haven't verified this, but I watched a video of two people on a podcast speaking yesterday. I have to verify this, and they were talking about Portland and how there was this historic kind of community building thing that happened in Portland where these shops all kind of set up on the same street, and they had their own sort of, I'm going to bastardize what they were talking about, but they had their own system of like bartering with each other, and it was this like strong community, and they exchanged things, and they were building up this whole kind of this little, in a very, very, very micro way, this kind of like movement of how they wanted to operate in their community. Yeah. And the government put like a highway down the, like made the street into like a high, so you couldn't go across. So they basically like found ways to break it up. So you had to go up and around and they were talking about how the power of community and the fact that the government is interested enough to break up that kind of that level of tiny kind of community building initiative demonstrates how powerful they know that kind of thing is. So it's easy to take for granted and think that it's not a big deal, but it's a big enough deal that they want to break it up.
Exactly.
So I thought that was an interesting food for thought.
Interesting. So my last in is making time work for me rather than trying to find time. I want to not feel like I'm always trying to find time for things. And I think my approach to this will be better planning and protection of my time. I've started blocking out my week. So deciding what I'm going to do this week and then putting time in my diary to do those things. and trying to commit to that, it's been hard. And when I haven't been able to do something, I think that act of moving it to another time slot really helps you with prioritization, and it allows you to fit personal things in. So one of the things that I want to make sure that I am doing by the end of the year is, I used to be a competitive swimmer. I've been swimming for they call them a masters team, which is essentially an adult swim team, for the last 4 years or so. Last year, I committed to going more often, which I definitely have. I go at least twice a week, most weeks. And this year it's about competing again. So we can compete if we want to. And I think to do that, I need to make sure everything else is organized. I need to make sure I'm getting in the gym, because I need to do that to also help with my swimming. And to do that, I just need to be a bit more intentional with my time, and allowing me to do that. By doing that, it gives me more time for me, which I think is really, really important. So I'm trying to commit to kind of, the first attempt is blocking out time and seeing how that goes, understanding what I can and need to achieve this week. And also being realistic with myself as well, right? Like being like, how long is this going to take? And not being too hard on myself if I get to the weekend and I haven't done anything, because I haven't done everything, because I can look back and go, well, actually, I used that time to do those other things, and it was important for me to go swimming. So I went that evening. And just being a bit more intentional and aware of what I'm doing, because I think you can easily I easily get into the habit of just like doing that thing next, doing that thing next, doing that. Then you end up forgetting half the things that you've done. You feel like you've done nothing.
Yeah.
I remember I used to sometimes get to the end of the week and have a catch up with my boss. And if I hadn't written down all the things that I'd done, sometimes I'm like, what did I do this week? Have I been slacking? It's like, no, Kieran, like I'd then sit down and go through like my whole diary and be like, and look at all my emails, like, no, I've done loads of stuff. It's so much I can't remember.
Yeah, 100%. I absolutely fall into that trap all the time now of like, what have I done this week? And it's such a dangerous thing, because as you say, it impacts you then think you haven't added value or
it
whatever.
Warps your perception.
It warps
your value that you're bringing to anything.
And the other thing, about your making time that I think makes total sense, and that is that rewiring of, no, I need this in order to perform better. It's not a thing that is a distraction from performing better or taking me away from it. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, I think I realized recently, so we had a week where my partner was not well, basically, recently, and it wasn't anything serious, but it was like serious in its manifestation. Essentially, she had a really, really, really painful tooth thing that was like agony. Couldn't, you have periods of time where you're waiting to get it like sorted or whatever, and it was getting worse and worse. And then the fact that it was getting worse was meaning she couldn't sleep, which meant that her mental health, and she had this really bad panic attack, and we had to go to A&E. It was all of this stuff that happened, and in this one week. And obviously I was supportive, and I did all of the things, but I had a sort of reflection about it, and I was like, I was more impatient and like not psychologically supportive enough because I have no capacity in my working life that, like, if anything throws anything off, it's like there's no room. It's like it's like the glass of water is completely full and it's spilling over, and it's like so if anything else gets poured into it, it's like disaster. And so I just there was a realization that I was like, I don't have the bandwidth for anything to go wrong personally, and that's a problem.
Yeah. And I don't think you're alone in that, right? Like, I remember points in roles I've done in the past where I've been like, if something happens outside of work, I don't know what I'll do right now. Because
I can't afford to sit half a day of inactivity.
And sometimes you can't just snap into being supportive, which is really hard when you want to, but you can't just context switch like that sometimes, especially if you're feeling highly stressed at any moment, and it's and it's not the person's fault that you're trying to support. I actually had a conversation with an ex-colleague recently who'd taken on quite a few I'd say, an unrealistic amount of reports. And one of the examples that I gave him was just be really careful about what you're taking on. I know it might seem like you can handle it now, but that amount of reports can, remember you're managing people. And if something goes wrong, and I just gave an example in the past of where I've had somebody in my team have a mental health break. There were things I think earlier on that I probably would have spotted if I wasn't flat out. And thankfully we caught that person before it, I think, got worse, it got any worse than it could have. And I just gave that example of remember, it's people. I understand the self-preservation side of things, but it's really important to keep that context of people are not a constant, are unpredictable in their nature, and then this is the thing that I love about managing people. You can't just take it for granted. They're not a constant, they're not predictable. And if something goes wrong, you need to be really clear. You need to have some security, or I would want to have security that I am able to prioritize in that situation and have enough capacity to do that. It's really hard. And it's really hard.
Yeah.
And I think when it impacts your personal life, it's even harder because you don't walk away from it, in a sense, at the end of every day.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's a work in progress. It resonated with me what you were saying about actively making the time.
Yeah. Being in control of that, I think it's a thing as well, of being this is when I'm doing these things and I'm not. I know there has to be some flexibility, but actually, does there?
Well, I think, just being more kind of deciding which things are sacred, at least.
Yeah. And because if you don't think about it, you won't. You'll allow all the things that are not more important than some of the things that you need to do outside of your job, for example. You'll allow the job to creep into parts of your life that it definitely shouldn't be creeping into.
Amen. Well, is that all?
Yeah, I think that's all of our ins. I hope that was interesting for people.
All of our outs, all of our ins. We could have talked about more.
Yes.
Better late than never.
Yeah, it is. I hope everyone's had a good start to the year. And I mean, it'd be really interesting actually to hear what people's kind of resolutions are and ins and outs are. I always find it so interesting how different people approach it. And actually, that's the feedback we got last year from the retro episode. Because people were like, oh, that's a really different way to look at New Year's resolutions, for example, which most people will, they'll put together New Year's resolutions and then it will just be these kind of very specific objective things that they need to do. And there's no thinking or talking about how you're going to get there.
Yes. And it's quite deficit based. These are all the things I did badly last year. And so I need to reset and do them well this year.
Yeah.
Rather than here's what I'd like to do more of.
Yeah. And these are the things that I've observed. This is what I want to do more of.
Yeah. Well, we can keep experimenting with the format.
Yes, exactly. And this is the end of the season. So thank to those who have been patient and have listened to all the episodes. We really appreciate it. We're now going into our third season, which feels crazy.
Yeah, we're already recording it. So fear not about our release schedule this time around. And we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Impolite Company.
If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to our show and share it far and wide with anyone you think will benefit.
And if you'd like to connect with us directly, we're on LinkedIn as Kieran Scott Woodhouse and Ella McCann Tomlin.
We'll be back soon.